All right, I'm just pulling up the PowerPoint and I'll start with that. So like Justin said, my name is Madeline Bachner. I've been working out here with the Cottonwood Institute in the Boulder, Denver area for about 4 years now. And the Cottonwood Institute is a very small nonprofit. We have 3 full-time employees and about 15 contracted instructors that we use. And we run programs all over the Front Range. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do and some of our general programming, and then really get into the military programming. So our basic overview is that we run on an idea that you can't expect students to care about the environment if they've never had the chance to explore the outdoors. And a lot of us in the EE world know that it's kind of an epidemic that students aren't getting outside, children aren't getting outside as much as they used to. So that's one of our main pieces of our mission and our message. So our mission is to connect students to the outdoors and empower them to take on local environmental issues to improve their schools, the community, and the environment for future generations. And we do that in a number of ways. I'll talk about several of our programs. But I wanted to give a little plug to project-based learning. That's kind of the thread that runs through our programming. And this is a great definition from Edutopia. If you're not familiar with Edutopia, that's an amazing resource for teachers and educators of all kinds. So project-based learning is basically just working with real-world problems and creating projects around that instigate deeper learning and knowledge for students. So our main program is called the Community Adventure Program, or CAP, and we've been running CAP for 10 years here in Boulder. We have several different kind of varieties of this program, but our core programming has happened at New Vista High School in Boulder, and it's about a 5 to 9 week program, depending on the amount of time the school has to run it. And the students are asked to pick a project, so pick an environmental issue, and create a project around that. And we've done everything from all kinds of gardening, work with transportation, energy use, water conservation and quality, to dog poop. There was an amazing project that talked about the problem of dog poop piling up in parks and how to clean them up after that. So these kids have done incredible projects throughout the years, and then part of the program is also going on camping trips and talking about low-impact camping and getting kids outside. So the picture on the left is one of those trips in the last year or so that we've done. We also have a program called ETF, or the Earth Task Force, that takes just that action project piece and replicates that over and over throughout the year. So they do tons of projects all year long. They're not involved in the class, but they just do the project kind of as a club, and they've had a lot of success with that. So that's our core programming, and then we've branched out into other areas. We also offer what we call design your own courses, and most of those are 3-night to week-long programs on fire ecology, sustainable living skills, farms and food, or basically gardening projects, as well as endangered wolves, which is probably our most popular, and we take kids down to Mission Wolf. And it is our busy season, so we have trips going out all week, headed down there and into many other places in the Front Range. And these programs are run throughout the Denver metro area with different schools and organizations. And then, of course, we have our military programming. So we've been running military programs off and on for about 4 or 5 years. And we've worked with Operation Military Kids, Welcome Home Warriors, as well as offering our own open enrollment military kids and family trips. So I'm going to talk, the bulk of this talk is about how we've engaged the military community and kind of some tips and lessons learned, some of our challenges and successes in doing that. I'm going to start with talking about connection, and that's really the beginning piece and the first step if you're interested in involving the military community in what you're doing or building programming specifically for military communities. Getting that connection and then keeping it is probably the most important and sometimes the most challenging piece of that project. So finding a veteran that's interested in your program is really important. It's a great first step. And it provides that personal connection into a base or into a program instead of just cold calling people and trying to figure out how to get in. So we've had a couple of donors and funders who have been veterans and who are really interested in military programs. And that's been the impetus behind the building of our military programming. Other ways to reach out are to youth programs, family centers, and homeschool organizations on bases. We found that there's a lot of homeschooling going on through the military, and there's all kinds of different ways to find those folks, but connecting with someone in those organizations is a great connection. And then getting onto a base if you can is also a great way to get kind of that hands-on, like actual meeting with people and meeting with families. And that can be a difficult step, and that's where you kind of go back to finding a veteran or someone in active military who can get you onto a base to talk to folks who are doing programming. So some of the challenges to working with military programs that we've found are similar to challenges working in any sector, really. And probably the first one that comes up is that folks are overworked and underfunded. And just in the last couple of years, our military program has gotten a little less enrollment and it's a little harder to fill because so many of the program directors that have the connection to students and families have gotten furloughed or have changed jobs or have piled on different jobs and now don't have the bandwidth to really do those connections anymore. So that's one issue we've come up against. The flow of information from programs to participants has also been sometimes difficult to achieve to really get the information you want out and get people interested in your trips. And that has in part to do with how transient folks are in the military. And I just want to say I'm not from a military background, so I'm not an expert on all of the military aspects of this. And that's part of the challenge. So if you have that available, if you are a veteran or you've been involved in the military, some of these things might be easier to piece together. But yeah, so folks in the military tend to be pretty transient. And so if you have a program that is in a particular place, sometimes it's really hard to get people plugged into that. And then a problem that's common in any after-school activity or environmental education or outdoor education is that students, kids, teenagers, people are just overbooked. They have so much going on that it can be really difficult to pull them into your programming. And that gets into marketing and figuring out how to time things and all of that stuff. And then the last thing I'd like to bring up about some of the challenges we face is a resistance to the environmental messaging of a lot of EE and outdoor ed programs. And I think a lot of that is perception more than reality, but there's certainly a perception and a kind of political spin about environmental messaging being kind of against what some military folks believe in. And I feel like there's tons of ways to make connections around that and ask questions instead of assuming. But it's something to keep in mind and maybe to think about how you market your programming if you're going into this. So a little bit about what we do that does work, that has worked over the last several years. Our programs that we offer to military families are less academic, so we're not doing the full action projects and CAPS program, but we are doing the outdoor piece. And so we talk about adventure and survival skills, which definitely gets people interested. We get people off the base, which is a huge aspect of what we do, and it's really simple in a lot of ways, and that's one of the beautiful parts about it. And in doing that, we create family time so that people are away from their distractions, and we allow the kids and families to just be kids and families, separate from that military tag. And then the last piece that I think all of us in EE really believe in is that quiet connection to the natural world. So I'm going to break those down a little bit and talk a little bit more about each of those aspects in our program. So a lot of the skills we teach are around camping and outdoor nature awareness. Low impact camping is kind of where we start because we take people out for overnight trips. We set up tents, we talk about stump holes and bear hangs and wherever you are in the country, whatever things work for you. And it's a great way to connect, especially with military folks who often have a lot of camping experience or more intense survival experience or training. And unfortunately in the military, like active duty military, often aren't very interested in the low impact side. So it's really a great way to teach kids and their parents and adults how to start implementing some of those lower impact ways of being in the woods. Excuse me. So we also talk about survival priorities. And again, that's a great connection piece to a lot of military folks. And it feels like it's dwindling now, but it has been a really kind of sexy media thing with all these survivor shows and survival and all that. And now I think it's zombies, but same principles of survival. And we talk about the rule of threes, which is an easy, kind of catchy way to get people engaged with the idea of survival priorities, talking about 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. and you go from there and can do all sorts of scenarios with that. We also do a lot around fire, and everybody likes to start fire, right? From little kids to adults, and especially teenagers, they love playing with fire. And so doing that in a safe way, doing that in a way that promotes leave no trace and fire management, and then bringing in those primitive fire starting skills is an awesome way to engage all ages and really get people working with their hands and doing something fun. Bow drills and primitive fire skills are a great challenge, especially for folks who know how to start fires and know how to manage campfires. You kind of throw them a bow drill and it gives a new challenge and a new way to figure things out. We also use debris shelters, which again is just an all ages fun activity where there's little kids just building nests or real debris shelters with structure and insulation and all of that. And then finally, teamwork and leadership is kind of enmeshed in all of this. And those are huge buzzwords, especially for teen programs, military programs. They all want to talk about teamwork and leadership with their groups. And so that's an easy thing that, all of us in outdoor and environmental ed can do, and that's part of our program. So getting time away from everyday worries and distractions, of course, that's why we take people into the backcountry or into the natural world. And I think one of the things that we offer is actually kind of a non-therapeutic experience. And there's tons of amazing therapeutic organizations and facilities, and not to take anything away from that, an amazing part of healing folks and families. But I think it's great to own if you don't do that and figure out what it is that you do that really provides value. So we have found from feedback from kids and families who've gone out with us that actually not asking questions and probing and saying, like, what is it like to be a military kid or all that stuff, and just letting people be in the natural world is what people really gain from the experience with us. So just getting folks out and getting them away from cell phones and TVs and computers and letting them be and play is really the thing that we do that's the most important, I think. So in that space, families have a way to reconnect with each other. And I think that's one of the reasons that we don't just cater to kids or teenagers. We do invite entire families out, and that can be messy because there's all sorts of dynamics there, but it's also an amazing place for people to be able to reconnect. And that's a lot of the work that's being done either through therapeutic organizations or just regular ED and outdoor education is connecting people back to themselves and to each other and through the natural world. And so that last piece, quiet time in the natural world, is probably the most powerful and magical piece of getting outside. And I take for granted that folks who are interested in EE are familiar with this and kind of understand the beauty of that. And I hope you are. And then, so our little way, our tool for really immersing people in that is called a sit spot. And so when we go out in the woods, we ask folks to find a quiet space, whether it's at the base of a tree or by a river or sitting on a rock, and just take a minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever the group is feeling like, and sit and either meditate or close your eyes or look around or hear the sounds and just let all that soak in. And that's really the beauty of what we're doing. So the impact of our programs are many. People have different experiences when they come out and play with us. This quote up on the slide is from a mother who brought her 4 daughters out and actually was leading on that trip. And they had a great time. They were just so sweet. And the 5-year-old was lighting cotton ball fires, and they just had a wonderful time. But she wrote this great quote about that experience and being able to get out with her girls while her husband was in Afghanistan. So it's just a little blurb about some of the things people get from that trip. So I wanted to give a little plug about some of the larger context before I wrap up here. And I've been noticing, I don't know much about the programs that are listed here. There's 3 that I just noticed in the media a lot lately, mostly on the radio. I've heard about the Got Your Six campaign. I think Macy's and Wells Fargo are really into that one. And their tagline is Bridging the Civilian-Military Divide. Show Your Stripes, I hear on the radio all the time about hiring veterans, and the American Corporate Partners is another hiring and career mentoring program. But basically, I just want to point out that there is this big impetus right now in America to kind of invite veterans and the military folks who are coming back into the civilian community And I think there's a lot of resources for that, and I think that's kind of popping up more and more as we see more folks coming back. And I think that's why it's popping up in EE capacity and why we're talking about it. And it's a great opportunity to expand our programming and really be part of the bigger community. So that's pretty much what I have to share. Love to hear your questions, kind of hear what you guys are working on. Again, I'm from the Cottonwood Institute, and we have a website if you're interested in what we're doing. Lots of programs listed there, as well as our military program. And we're open enrolling. If you know anybody out here, we still have 4 or 5 spots left for our June trip. So I'm going to hand it back over to Justin and kind of open up for questions from you all.
Thanks so much, Madeline.
Yeah.
I know that I have a few questions. There was some of the audio kind of was going in and out on my end. I mean, I can pretty much hear everything that you said, but some things. So you had said when you were quiet time, you have a sit time. Is that what you were describing? I didn't know if you had like an acronym or something that you used.
It's called a sit spot. That's what we call it.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. So if everybody else has questions, you can either message them in through the chat system, or you can try to pose a question verbally. If you have, if you're on call, or if you are using the webinar system, you should be able to unmute your speaker and be able to talk. What I wanted to go back real quick, just to start off the question, is to get maybe a little bit more information on how you are conceptualizing or working with this issue around resistance to environmental messaging, and what kinds of, I guess, suggestions you would have in terms of the marketing strategies for groups that are trying to incorporate military community into their work.
Yeah, it's a great question that comes up a lot, because I think, like I said, there's a perception that there's a divide there. And I think the really key message is that everyone is connected. And so as much as there might be some political spin about differences and this perception about it, it's really not as big a gulf as we think it is. And so in terms of marketing, like I said, we kind of market our military programming as adventure weekends, survival skills, and highlight those pieces of what we do that aren't, like, almost can't be viewed as political. And so we're talking about having fun, getting outside, being connected to the natural world. And then we have found that the military programs we've worked with simply aren't as interested in those environmental and academic pieces. And part of that is because of the programming and the time frame that they have kids. You know, they're not in school necessarily. And part of it, I think, is a little bit of hesitance to really dive into an environmental action kind of piece.
Thank you. It looks like Anne has a question, and she wants to know who has been your biggest advocate or base for your programs?
Yeah. So there's kind of a couple different ways I could take that question, I guess. So we started out with advocates from our funding base, who I think there's a veteran, and then there's some other folks who are really interested in connecting military programs to EE. And so that's kind of the basis of why we started doing military programs. And then once we started in terms of programming, there's been a couple program directors from Operation Military Kids, and then Buckley Air Force Base had a pretty thriving teen program for a while. And those have been our biggest connectors in terms of getting participants on trips. And we actually found those folks through a friend of the program, a friend of the executive director, actually, who is a veteran and just kind of knew who to call. And so that's why when I talked about making connections, starting with a veteran or someone who has their fingers in the military world is a really great way to make those connections and find the people who can help you find participants and help model or shape your programming. Does that answer the question?
And it sounds good. So so basically you were approached.
Yeah.
Already. Okay.
In the beginning we were approached by funders who said, we'd like to give you money to build a program that caters to the military families.
Okay. Cool.
And here in Denver, we're surrounded by bases. We have three or four bases in Colorado Springs, a couple of bases just north of the border in Wyoming, and then Buckley Air Force Base just outside of Denver. So we've got a huge population right here.
Now, I was thinking about if you were to expand, and I was thinking also about in terms of some of the programs that participants might be looking at developing, what would they be able to, I guess, how would they incorporate some of the other, like design your own program, design your own course, if there were advocates of military kids or veterans that wanted to, say, like work through a program, would they be able to develop a program through you? Or if somebody wanted to develop something, what kind of, I guess, advice could you give in terms of programming around that design your own course type of approach that you have?
Yeah, like designing programs through kind of our offerings, is that what you're asking?
Correct, yeah.
Well, if someone approached us about that, it'd be great, because it'd be easy to just take whatever group they had and apply it to the programs that we already have connections to. So, I mean, advice would be really finding the participants. I think that's one of the challenging parts. We don't do open enrollment except for these military programs. And the reason we don't is because it's hard to open enroll. And so if you have the participants, or like in the scenario we're talking about, like someone approaches you from a teen group or whatever on a base, that makes that piece easy because they've got the participants, and then we can just plug them into the program. And then like the smaller details about kind of program content, I guess, like I said, just asking questions and really asking what they want and what they want out of it, and then being able to tailor that to what's going on out in the field.
Thank you. Pat has a question. Have you considered contacting family readiness officers or deployment support groups from active or reserve units?
I think that's come up, and we haven't made any specific contact with folks from those groups. We've reached out with just in trying to market this trip that we have coming up in June. We reached out to basically everyone we've ever contacted who had any association with the military. And so a lot of times we're talking to folks who send things on to their network, and so I don't even know how far it reaches sometimes. But that would be a great start. If you have connections to any groups like that, that's an amazing way to start off getting folks interested in your programming.
Cool. Let's see. Does anybody else have any more questions? Wait a second. People may be shy.
Gotta let it sink in.
Yeah. I did find that your dog poop program is kind of interesting.
Yeah, that was always interesting. It gets people's attention, make sure you're not throwing poop out there. But it's a real program. It was a real project that a group of kids did. And there was actually, it's Boulder, right? So there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on here. But there was a person who used satellite imagery to mark all of the piles of dog poop along the trails. We have a lot of open space trails here. And the results were overwhelming. It was ridiculous how much dog poop is in the parks because people don't pick it up. And so it was an education campaign around that. But they wrote an article, they got it in the local newspaper, and they did like a reading on a local radio program as well. So
they did a GPS map of hot spots, so to speak.
So to speak, yes. Also one.
And
there's
has
other
another.
programs too, with like solar panels and bike transportation, not just dog groups.
Yeah, yes, of course. Yeah, yeah. I don't want to just focus on that, but that. Anne has another question. She asks, do you cater programs to different age groups, or is it all family programs?
So yes, the short answer is yes, we cater to different age groups. One of the things that makes Cottonwood Institute unique is that we do mostly environmental education for middle and high school. So across the board, a lot of EE is directed at like 4th, 5th, 6th graders. So our academic programming is based more for middle and high school. And then we have done a few 5th and 6th grade groups. Actually have a 4th through 6th grade group going out next week. And our curriculum is kind of that 7th, 8th through 12th grade. And then the family trips, we really just do with the military programming, and then we started doing family trips with a Latino community in Boulder County as well. So we kind of run the gamut of age groups.
Awesome, thank you. And Ian's got a question. He wants to know if you can expand upon the issue of family dynamics that you mentioned.
Sure, and I think, it comes up in different ways, and I've guided trips for many, many years in different capacities. And so when you have a family, it's different than just having a group of teenagers. And if you have groups of families, it's even different. And so mostly what I'm talking about is when you have like a parent and their child or their teenager especially, they have a dynamic going on that's changing rapidly because kids are changing and families are figuring it out as they go. And so then bringing that into the woods, getting that dynamic outside of the comfort zone sometimes is amazing and healing and just kind of quells some of the friction. But sometimes people get uncomfortable and that stuff comes out more. And so, like I said, we're not a therapeutic organization, so we don't really like dig into it, but it's there. And so sometimes you have to be aware of that if you're offering family trips. And then another capacity, I used to guide van-based trips up into Yellowstone National Park, and we'd have families that, paid to go out for the day, and they all pile into this 15-passenger van. And it was just amazing to kind of be a fly on the wall on some of those trips and see how families interacted with each other. And so as a leader on those trips, you get to do that. And sometimes it's entertaining, and sometimes it's just kind of, I don't know what the word, like embarrassing, or you just kind of have to move on. But yeah, family dynamics are interesting, always interesting.
Thank you. Looks like Latrice has a question too. I hope I'm saying your name right. She says that I live in a military community, veteran housing, where some of the family have been out of the military for several years. What approach will I take when introducing this program to those veterans?
I'm not sure what the question is. I think specifically if you were introducing Cottonwood programs or introducing a program, any program to them.
I think, yeah, any program. So, like, if she was going to be developing her own program, it was similar. Is that correct?
Is that what she's saying? Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I think ultimately it doesn't really matter if you're talking about getting people out into the natural world, any kind of EE or outdoor education. It doesn't matter how active they are in the military or not. You're saying people have been out of it for several years. That's fine. It's really just about tapping into that community. So it sounds like it's still a military community, so folks are connected by that activity. And so taking that connection and running with it and being able to say, okay, you're part of this community, and now let's do something different, and let's go outside or go on a camping trip or whatever the program content is. It's really just about making connections with folks. So whether they're active duty or not, or if they've been out of the military or whatever, it's just reconnecting people. Does that make sense? Does that answer that question at all?
Well, let's see. So her comment was, thank you, military first, then environmental. The connection is the most important. Yeah, so, yeah, it looks like in terms of, like, would you, like, if you were, like, in a community, like, would you, like, put up flyers? I mean, what kind of suggestions would you have, like, to create, like, a meeting place to be able to begin conversation, to make those kinds of connections? I mean, that might be one option. I don't know how that might work. If there's, like, a public posting or being able to invite people to have a conversation about some of this to be able to gauge some kind of interest within your housing community. So that might be one option as well.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what the community is like. But if there is already a community forum of any kind, like a meeting or, I don't know, any place that people come together, yeah, send up flyers or just tabling, kind of like being there to talk to people about it, is great. And then having some capacity to grab some information from them. So emails, I mean, that's the world I live in. Getting people's emails and then being able to send out information is another way, and then draw them together for maybe a different forum to talk about what you want to do. Those are all ideas that come to mind.
Thanks, Latrice. Thanks, Madeline. Ian wanted to know, do you have any age limitations to participation in your programs?
Yeah, a little bit. Well, for instance, the program I just put together that we're still enrolling for in June, I said it's open to families. Anyone who's under 12 needs to have a parent with them. You know, we're not really in a capacity to take 4- and 5-year-olds out on their own. Not that they would want to go. But just, I mean, you just have to think about risk management and your own program goals in terms of developing your own programs and building in those levels of age levels or whatever. But yeah, so we have 12 and under need to have a parent with them, and 12 and over they can come on their own if they want to, if that works for them. And then when we do trips that aren't family trips, again, it depends on the groups we're taking out, but usually, like I said, we're working with middle and high school kids. So that kind of has a natural boundary.
Let's see, we got more questions rolling in. So are there any suggestions on how to relate better with the military, i.e., any barriers to communication that need to be addressed when working and facilitating these programs?
Barriers to communication. That's a great question. And again, it depends on who's actually coming, because we're dealing with a community, but then individuals within that community. And so sometimes there are barriers because people have experienced trauma and they're really not comfortable. Maybe they're not comfortable outdoors, or they have triggers that you don't know about or you should know about. So that could be something to keep in mind. And then I think one thing that, I don't know how much it has come up on our trip, but it's definitely out there, is just that there's very specific ways that the military communicate with each other. So when you're in the military, there's all sorts of acronyms that are used and codes and kind of almost a different language. And like I said, I am very much a civilian, so I'm not super familiar. But I think just having that understanding that people are coming from different worlds, especially if they're coming fresh off of active duty, and just being able to accommodate that, which can be as simple, like I said, as asking questions and making sure people are comfortable and people understand what's going on. And we like to start our courses by asking what people want out of it. So we have some objectives and some goals for ourselves, and we have our risk management protocol we need to follow. But then within that, finding out what the participants want and then being able to adapt to that is really important. And that can quell some communication issues just by asking that question and letting people know that you're there for them and you want to build an experience that works for them.
Thank you. And just so everybody knows, there is a PDF attachment on the course site that kind of goes into some of the acronyms and language communication issues, ways to things that you might want to think about. And that's in the 3rd week, but there's nothing to say that you can't go in there and download that now and begin reviewing that now. Now, it looks like Jolie has a question, and she says, my zoo has trouble with consistency in the relationship with Fort Drum due to the high turnover. What steps would you recommend to keep new people coming in as others leave?
That is a good question, and that's one of those challenges that we face constantly because that turnover is very real. So one step would be to find someone who is at the base, who isn't as transient, who stays there, who either runs a program, a family program, an outreach program. There's usually someone working for families and for folks who are coming in and out of the base. And that would be the person who could connect you with the folks that are coming in and kind of keep that going. And that said, we've had those people at bases and then they've left, or they've been furloughed, or they've, like I said, had their job changed. So that's not a fix-all, but figuring out who that person is, and it can be hard to do that, quite honestly. If you can get any contact who's on the base, or even a family that you know right now who's there, and ask them who the coordinator is or who is working with families and teams on the base, that would be a great way to start that.
Thank you. Yeah, that seems to be one of the major issues. I was talking with other of our guests who have stressed that as being one of the most difficult aspects in terms of sustainability of these programs. It's like starting over each time somebody moves or is transferred.
It is, and I know that that's also just as frustrating for the people who are moving. And so it doesn't answer this question at all, but it's good to remember that when you do get folks, to forget the frustration of having all the work to get them and just be really happy that you have them and be understanding about their situation as well. Yeah, figuring out how to keep it consistent is very difficult. It's near impossible sometimes.
Thank you. See, we might have a few more questions. So far, pretty good. There was some really good questions. I'm glad you let us pick your brain for.
Well, I hope it's helpful.
I think it is. I mean, there are so many different dynamics involved in dealing with some of the institutional structure itself, and then there are the interpersonal communication processes that go on, and obviously you'll have that with any community that you work with. But I think sometimes with that transient nature and the moving around and the pressures that puts on a family and on personnel and on programs itself could be very challenging. And it's good to know on how you guys are dealing with. I mean, it seems like it's just like the nature of the job in that way.
Yeah, it is. And another piece I'll add to that is being flexible with your programming if and where you can. So when we're offering camping trips, we have to pick a date and go on that day. But if you have a facility where you can have open hours or just be really flexible in how you engage military folks, that will help a little bit. And then again, just trying to find a person on base who is an advocate for families will also help with continuity.
Yeah. So, well, I want to move on to the next question, but I wanted to. You said that to have a facility where people can come and visit.
I just think if that is part of your program, then use that to your advantage and be flexible with hours or programming or however you can be flexible is important.
So Ian wanted to know, do you maintain contact with any of the participants afterwards? If they are in base, perhaps their personal story of success would help advertise your product.
Yeah, we've tried with that, and we definitely send out follow-up emails after a program so that we can send out pictures and kind of send out the story of the program. And we've had a couple folks who've come multiple times. And then again, sometimes that transient factor works in and they move on. Yeah, sharing stories is powerful. That's why we love that mom who sent an email that I had the quote in the PowerPoint. Stuff like that's just fantastic. And so if you do get people out and have a program, definitely getting the contact information and following up in order to reach out and grab those stories is key.
And it looks like Latrice had a comment.
Yeah.
She's talking about postcard, email, social media, and input from deployed soldiers is a big tool. Also, I mean, you seem pretty media savvy in terms of your use of technology, and I just wonder how much interaction you have or try to develop with soldiers that are deployed, particularly when you're working with families and how they are able to maybe follow along on the progress of their adventure. And have you had any experience with that?
We actually haven't. We haven't connected directly with deployed soldiers. We've heard from families who, part of the family was here and they went out with us and went home and then connected with their whoever was away, and that's always powerful to hear about. But no, we haven't done that on course. But that would be a fun idea to play with if you could get technology out wherever you are to connect. So yeah, I mean, definitely building social media and all of those things are great ways to keep in touch and figure out what your participants are doing and share stories.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it'd be interesting. I'm just sitting here trying to think about or conceptualize how that would work, but it'd be interesting if you were able to connect with deployed soldiers who initiate their families to engage in one of your programs.
Yeah, that would be really interesting.
Well, I don't see any more questions yet, but let's see. Oh, Tina wanted to know, are all of your attendees local?
Yeah, regional. I'll say regional because, like I said, we've got folks from Colorado Springs. Actually, sometimes we've led trips further south, closer to Colorado Springs. So we're pulling people from sometimes 2 to 3 hours away, but definitely within the region. We started to talk with Buckley Air Force Base about a program that would pull in teams in different programs from the surrounding states, and it didn't come together, but it was exciting in its infancy. Just never quite came all the way together.
What was the main reason that it didn't come together? Just funding, or is just coordination with all of the large area?
It was the coordination, and then the program director we were working with at Buckley, they lost funding. So we still had funding for a trip for kids, but he lost funding to keep doing the connection work and pulling these folks together. And so it kind of fell apart, which was unfortunate because it was going to be a new experience, I think.
Ian wanted to know how many participants are there on each event, and how many staff? So, like, what is your participant staff ratio, and are any of your staff ex-military?
Yeah, we for a while we did have one guy who was ex-military working with us, and that was an awesome connection to have if you're sending military folks out on a trip with someone who is a veteran. That's fantastic. And then our ratio, I always shoot for, well, usually we're shooting for about 12 people, kind of, I would say 10 to 15 on a trip, but 12 is a good number. And we have 2 instructors. So it depends on your risk management and kind of what your program goals are. But I would say 2 instructors is pretty industry standard. You've got a backup. And then it also depends on where you're going. So some Forest Service and land land sites require certain ratios. You know, in Maine for a while it was like 1:8 or 1:6, depending on what land you were using. So those are all things to keep in mind. And then there's also permitting that requires group sizes sometimes. But we usually have about 12 to 15 folks and 2 instructors.
Excellent. Well, if there are any more questions, go ahead and send. I think we're getting close to wrapping up, though. We're coming up on our time, and yeah, I just wanted to say thank you again. It sounds like you've had a lot of experience in different types of areas, and the different areas of programming that you have could be really interesting inspiration for some of the participants to model some of their program ideas around as well. And
yeah,
I know that some people are working directly with youth, some are working with veterans, some are veterans and working with youth, some are doing family work, and some are also working with youth with some military kids that are part of the program but not necessarily focused on military kids exclusively. And so there are a lot, I think, opportunities here that Cottonwood as a model can provide. And so, yeah, it seems pretty interesting.
Well, I'd love to add that if more questions come up or people are interested in our programming, you have the website cottonwoodinstitute.org, and my information's on the website. My email is Madeline at cottonwoodinstitute.org, and you can feel free to shoot me questions. I will be incredibly busy until June, so if I'm slow to respond, that is why. But yeah, I'd welcome more conversation around this and questions and advice, whatever's out there.
Would it be okay if I added you to the course Facebook group?
Yeah.
Okay, I will send you a message, and that way, that might be one way that people can communicate with you as well and ask you questions on the Facebook group. Ian mentioned that you just wanted to say thank you for sharing, and I echo that. He's a British military.
I saw that on the list.
Yeah. He was able to participate from overseas, which I think is awesome.
That's great.
And so, yeah, he's got a lot of interest and experience in this area, but there's no other programs, it seems, that are similar. And I don't know, Ian, maybe this is an opportunity for you to develop something.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I want to thank you again, and I think we're about ready to wrap up, and I will go ahead and when I have the recording set up, I will post this on the Facebook group, and along with Madeline's PowerPoint presentation, so that will be accessible for everyone. And if you have any comments, any extra comments that you want to make, please make them on the Facebook group so everyone can see. And I want to thank everybody for attending.
And you should like the Cottonwood Institute on Facebook, too.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Madeline. Bye-bye.
Bye, Justin. Thank you.